There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with my IndigAthon TBR. I am so stoked for IndigAthon this year. I didn't know about it its first year. Managed to participate to a certain degree last year alongside my nonfiction November TBR, but this year nonfiction November is out the window. I do have a couple other nonfiction books that are not Indigenous that I will be reading, and that's it. So I'm not going to bother making a TBR video for those. I'll just tell you all about them in my Friday reads when the time is right. But I am going crazy with my IndigAthon TBR. I'm so excited. I will probably not get to all of these. This is more a pile of possibilities, a la cousin of always doing. But I do hope to get to a lot of them, and those that I don't find that I'm able to fit in during the month of November, I will read later. I have actually been concentrating quite a bit on Indigenous books for the last year and more. So this just is an intensification of a reading project that was already very important to me. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. So this is organized by Michelle at Thor Wants Another Letter and Bear at A2 Brody. Their announcement videos are linked in the show notes. That runs for the entire month of November, which suits me just fine. I'm sure they have challenges and prompts and all kinds of fabulous stuff that I'm too old to participate in. I just have generated a TBR of stuff that I'm really eager to get to. So before I get into my actual TBR, I would like to mention 3 books that are in progress, some of which will not yet be finished by the time IndigAthon starts on November 1st. I'm filming this on October 17th, and I know I won't be finished this one. A National Crime, the Canadian Government and the Residential School System, 1879 to 1986, by the historian John Milloy. I found out about this book on a CBC radio podcast, immediately ordered it, started reading it. It's a really painful read, with the obvious exception of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report on the residential school system, which came out, I don't remember which year, 2016. I don't remember what year that came out. This one was published a few years before that, 15 or so years, 1999. But this is one of the main works of history that people refer to. So I wanted to immerse myself in the history because I needed to know all about this national crime that Canada perpetrated on Indigenous peoples, and the after effects of which continue today. It's overwhelming, but also fascinating. So I actually hope to finish it during IndigAthon and get a review up, but that's pretty ambitious because I'm only reading 3 or 4 pages a day at most, so maybe I need to amp that up. Based on having read a fifth of it, I recommend it extremely highly. I am also rereading my top read of the year so far, and I don't expect that top read status to change. The Yield by Tara June Winch, which is a novel. Tara June Winch is a Wiradjuri author who grew up in Australia, and this is a novel about it's such a heartbreaking novel about colonialism and Indigenous experience in Australia. As I keep saying whenever I talk about it, I loved it so much, it affected me so profoundly that I have been rendered mute. So I'm rereading it very slowly. It'd be lovely to finish this up and review it during IndigAthon. Heartbreaking. And I am also reading as a buddy read with Heidi in my reading life, and I think we'll finish the weekend that IndigAthon opens. So I'll just mention it in passing, and again, hope to get a review up during IndigAthon of a work of nonfiction about a particular Indigenous reserve in Ontario. It's Kashechewan Reserve in the far north of Ontario. And this book is called Invisible North, The Search for Answers on a Troubled Reserve by Alexandra Shimo. She is a settler journalist, and she spent time there delving into all of the horrific issues that Canadian colonialism has perpetrated upon the Indigenous people living there. But in particular, the fallout from an E. coli breakout a few years earlier. I'm finding it absolutely out. It's just enraging me and educating me. So I will finish that up just around the time that IndigAthon gets started. I also have a surprise book that I'm reading as a pre-read for IndigAthon, and there's going to be a Zoom chat about it early in IndigAthon, so I'll keep you in suspense about that. I'm not going to even mention what it is or anything. Without further ado, and in no particular order, I've got a long list. I have been quite methodical in favoring shorter books so that I can read more books during IndigAthon, and again, I really don't care if I don't finish them this month, but I have chosen some short ones. The first short one is a novel from an Indigenous writer in New Zealand, Potiki by Patricia Grace, and she was born in Wellington in 1937, so this must have originally been published some time ago, 1986 maybe. I can't read this small print in this lighting, so I need a flashlight or a magnifying glass with a flashlight, but let's carry on. It is 175 pages, set on a remote coast of New Zealand, focusing on a small Maori community. That's all I need to know. This one is a chunky work of nonfiction, but this one I'm going to extend. I've already worked out a buddy read schedule that will extend right up until the end of December. 2 essays a week. A work of Canadian colonial and Indigenous history, On the Cusp of Contact, Gender, Space and Race in the Colonization of British Columbia. Essays by Jeanne Barman, edited by Margery Fee. This is a buddy read with the fabulous, but not nearly well-known enough booktuber, Jay Shea. I'll put a link to his channel in the show notes. And we read a work of Indigenous history focused on Western Canada, the Prairie Provinces, I think a couple of years ago. I come from the Prairie Provinces. I actually don't know where Jay comes from originally, but he lives in British Columbia. So I said, the next one we read that has an Indigenous historical focus, let's pick one for British Columbia. So this is the one that we have chosen. Jeanne Barman is a settler historian who is well respected by Indigenous historians. She has done decades of historical research on Indigenous history specific to British Columbia, and this one is a mix of, I think the primary focus is Indigenous history, but there are also chapters about other ethnicities. This one was published in 2020, but primarily Indigenous in focus. For example, the first essay the subtitle is The Erasure of Urban Indigenous Space in Early 20th Century British Columbia, and the second one is Erasing Indigenous Indigeneity in Vancouver. Wow. Jay, I can't wait. And here is a modern classic of Native American literature, A House Made of Dawn by M. Scott Momaday. It's funny, when I see his name, I always want to say Nomaday, but it's Momaday, N. Scott Momaday. And this novel is not new. Originally published in 1966. The protagonist has come home to New Mexico from war, I don't know what war, to find himself caught between two worlds. That's all I need to know. I've heard really, really good things about N. Scott Momaday. I'm finally going to get to this one. Just under 200 pages as well. I'm going to do an audiobook, and I may end up springing for the ebook and do it as an audio text combo, but I may just listen to it on audio. It's narrated by the author, and isn't she the poet laureate of the United States right now? Joy Harjo. Have I got that right? I better double check that. Her memoir is called Crazy Brave, a spiritual coming-of-age memoir. She is primarily a poet, as I understand it, and this memoir is... Oh, I thought it was new. No, it's not. It was 2012. Doesn't make a whit of difference to me. She is the incumbent United States Poet Laureate, the first Native American to hold that honor. Yeah, that's what I thought. So really stoked about that. This one will definitely be an audio text combo. I have the first edition of this memoir by a Métis writer who grew up in Saskatchewan. Her name is Maria Campbell, and her famous memoir is called Halfbreed. This is the first edition, and I will not be reading it. I will be reading the second edition, which was just published, I believe, 2 years ago, in which the chapter that her publishers convinced her back in, when was the original published? 1973. The publishers didn't wanted her to cut out the chapter where she was recounting her being raped by a police officer, and she reluctantly agreed. So it's been restored in the second edition, and I will be reading it as an ebook and listening to it as an audiobook narrated by Maria Campbell, who I once met because I'm from Saskatchewan originally. Didn't have any sort of substantive conversation with her, but boy, I would love to nowadays. I've watched her on one Zoom chat about Indigenous literature a few months ago, and I think she's in her early 80s maybe now, and she's wonderful. So finally, and this will be a buddy read with Heidi of My Reading Life, the second edition. This is what the audio book or the new cover looks like. This is a Blame It on Litzy. No, it's a Blame It on Lindy thing. I met Lindy years ago on Litzy, but this is definitely a Blame It on Lindy thing. Addition to my TBR. This book is called Nishka, and the author is Jordan Abel. And this is a deeply autobiographical meditation attempting to address the complicated legacies of Canada's residential school system and contemporary Indigenous existence. He is a writer from the Nishga people and an intergenerational survivor of residential schools. Just published in May of this year, Lindy read a short excerpt from it in her camera flip video, which I will link in the show notes, and I was completely sold. It is, I wouldn't say bite-sized, but short excerpts from various documents and poetry. Poetry he's written, legal documents, letters he's written to friends, and the overall effect apparently is incredibly powerful, so I am going to get to it. It's almost 300 pages, but I think there's quite a few pages that are not full. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm really looking forward to getting to it. And I wanted to read something from Australia. I've got something from New Zealand. I've got one or two from the States, quite a bit from Canada, and I didn't have one from Australia. And the one that I originally chose, I looked into a little bit more, and I thought, maybe not for me. And then I found this one, which is quite new. How new is it? February of this year. A short story collection from Australia, Born Into This, by Adam Thompson. I am going to do this as an audiobook and maybe with the ebook as well. The audiobook sounds wonderful. And the audiobook is only 4.5 hours. Adam Thompson is an Aboriginal writer from the Pokiak people on the island of Tasmania. How fascinating. This was a book that I could order fairly inexpensively and get it overnight delivered to me here in Tokyo earlier this year. And it is a work of history of Métis people. Now, if you don't know what Métis is, I think I'm now qualified to try to explain it. I have blundered my way through really woefully uneducated and inadequate description. So I would say that Métis is a distinct Indigenous culture that grew out of marriages and relationships between the original Quebec trappers and traders with Indigenous women. And then that group formed a cohesive nation, growing out of the early settlements in what is now Manitoba. And then descendants of those Métis pioneers, those Métis people from that settlement, now live in various places, are based in various other places in Canada, all tracing their ancestry back to the Manitoba settlement, but then going further back. Quebec, not only Quebec, I should say also Scottish trappers and their liaisons, their marriages with Indigenous women centuries before. But it is a nation, it is a distinct culture, and it is not just mixed race people that happen to be part Indigenous. That's what I used to say because I was a stupid idiot. I think I've done a better job here. I've read a new history of the Métis people that I thought was... I learned a lot from it, but it wasn't that great, and it's just left me really curious to find out more about the Métis people. And so I picked up this book, which is kind of a microhistory of one particular woman. It's called The Identities of Marie Rose Delorme Smith, Portrait of a Métis Woman by Doris Jeanne MacKinnon. So that sounds like a settler author. She's a specialist in Western Canadian history. This was published in 2012 at the University of Regina, and it is about this one Métis woman's life in Saskatchewan. How fabulous. And one of the few Métis women of that generation that actually wrote about her life. She had 17 children, ran a boarding house, homesteaded in southern Alberta, and served as a medicine woman and midwife before dying at age 99 in 1960. She wrote several articles in a journal or a newspaper called Canadian Cattlemen and left several other writings which formed the source for this book. It's so fascinating, and it's really short. Without the footnotes, it's about 120 pages. I definitely will be getting to this one during IndigAthon. Doesn't that sound fascinating? And the last one, I do have one alternate, and that's kind of way down on my pile of possibilities, but the other one that I will definitely be getting to, this is a children's, maybe a middle grade book about a survivor of the residential school system who comes from a northern indigenous peoples, most precisely called the Inuvialuit, and I think that could be grouped in the larger group, the Inuit. And she wanted to go to residential school because she was dying for an education. Most of the victims of the residential school system were dragged there, kidnapped, abducted. She really wanted to go, and then she had a horrific experience. This is called Fatty Legs. And her name pre-residential school was Uliman, and she was named Margaret at school. So she is now known, she passed away earlier this year, I believe, Margaret Uliman Pokiak-Fenton. And it's co-written with her, I believe, daughter-in-law, Christy Jordan-Fenton. And it's supposed to be incredibly powerful, with lots of illustrations. This came to my attention through a guest on my Bite Size Book Chats series, Lara, who talked about it. And in fact, I saw it on her Goodreads, and I invited her to be a guest, and she came on and talked about this, and I immediately went out and bought it. So really looking forward to getting to this one for IndigAthon. Now, this is an alternate, and if I don't get to this during IndigAthon, if I happen to bail on one or something, and I think I can fit one more in, this will be the one I choose. This is hot off the press, and this is, it's more than a memoir. They say part memoir and part manifesto by an Indigenous Canadian writer, an Anishinaabe writer, broadcaster, and arts leader born and raised in Toronto. Jesse Wente. Unreconciled, Family, Truth, and Indigenous Resistance. Powerful title. I've heard him interviewed about it. It sounds really incredible. So, doesn't my TBR sound fabulous? I want to start tomorrow. Thanks for watching.